Good morning, Leafs fam. Well, that's that. An ugly finish to what's been a pretty good-looking season all in all. The Leafs are done. A 7-4 loser in that pear-shaped contest in Boston, one that we almost anticipated would happen. Mike Augello is standing by to dissect the situation and prognosticate as to what may be in the future for your Toronto Maple Leafs. Don't forget, great regular season, Game 7, coming back from 2-0 and 3-1 deficits. There are good things to extract from this experience, and there are some things that really do need to be extracted, removed, and replaced. I'm Norman James. This is the Leafs Conversation, starting now. And here is our trusty friend, Mr. A. Good morning, Michael. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Norman. I'm doing well, and I think that the result of last night was sort of expected. Unfortunately, I predicted the Bruins to win the series in 7 games, and the problems that I foresaw in terms of the Leafs winning this series against a more experienced and almost as good offensive team in the Bruins, they really came to fruition, especially in Game 7. It was a great season, and we'll talk about it more. But I think that the failings of this team, where their need to address those failings, they revealed themselves in the series.
This is the Leafs Conversation. Mike Augello, Norman James. Thank you, Leafs fam, for all of your support. We're just building this thing every single time we take to the microphones and have a conversation about the biggest team in hockey that is no longer playing hockey, at least for this season, falling 7-4 to the Bruins. A 7-game series with Boston, the Leafs coming back from 2-0 and 3-1 deficits en route to last night's debacle, Mike. I mean, how do we categorize this? They came out guns a-blazing offensively, and they just had no answer defensively. So at one end of the ice, the Leafs proved their value. At the other end, they proved that they are not worthy of advancing to the second round, certainly not playing in a tension-packed Game 7. So let's just start with the first period. What was your sense about that period, considering that the Leafs got off to the start, Boston would answer, and then fired back to take the lead? Did you still feel comfortable with the Leafs game after the first period, or did you not feel comfortable with how they were playing at all?
Well, I said, via Twitter, because I was commenting on the game as it was going along, that this can't be the game that the Bruins want to play, because the one type of game that I think the Leafs could win in a Game 7 is a fire wagon hockey game, and it had all the markings of a 6-5, 7-6 type of game, the way they were playing in the first period. What was troubling from the Toronto perspective is, you get the opening goal, you get the second Marleau goal, you've scored a couple times in the first period, and there was no sense and there was no ability present for this team to not shut it down and play suffocating defensive hockey, because that's not in their bailiwick. But they just and in this game especially, as opposed to some of the games in Toronto, they had no concept of being able to limit Boston from going to the front of the net or getting good offensive chances. And in the first period, I felt a little sorry for Frederik Andersen, because I think he didn't have a lot of chance on, the couple of the goals, and the third goal, the one that came with less than a minute left to go. That was, I thought that was a potential killer, because if you're leading or tied in the first period in Game 7, and then all of a sudden you go to the locker room and you're behind 3-2, and you've lost your top defenseman in Morgan Rielly, who you didn't know whether it was going to come back after taking that shot in the face from Chara, that was potentially like deflating and maybe out for the count.
The Leafs are inept defensively, Mike, and that was we knew the warning signs were there. What makes it sting even more is that those warnings prove to be correct, and there was nothing the Leafs seemed to be able to do about it. It was just such a reckless game after the puck dropped following a Leafs goal. The response was not to continue to come back for more offensive chances, nor was it to batten down the hatches. It was just, well, okay, we scored. Now here comes Boston. And
Right.
the Bruins, clearly the Bruins, whether it was a said thing or just a quietly known thing, were well aware of the Leafs' offensive limitations and deficiencies, and they made a mockery of the Maple Leafs in their own end. And we clearly haven't brought up number 51's name yet, and the guy's just getting tortured on social media. So I don't think we need to exacerbate that. I don't think we need to compound that. But Mike, what was glaring for me, and we'll get to the second period in a second, which was a good period for the Leafs. But what made me frustrated was that the guy on the defensive end who was committing the most errors based on his inability to calm himself and calm the play seemed to be put back in that scenario shift after shift after shift. There was, a lot of that to me seems to come down to the reality that there was no substitute for that guy who was at the center of so much trouble back there.
Right. Well, and I remember in some of the commentary before Game 7 that, if based on the fact that Travis Dermott was a little bit shaky and showing his rookie, the fact that he's a 21-year-old rookie, and he showed a few giveaways in Game 6, that might mean that, Riley and Gardiner would have to play 26 or 27 minutes. I know I have no problem with Morgan Riley playing 26 or 27 minutes because I think he's at least an adequate defender. But, and then he had an okay series. He had 5 points. He had some problems in his own zone, but, he was able to sort of bounce back from those and produce offensively. That sort of counteracted that. But Gardiner, who scored 52 points during the regular season, you're right. Babcock continued to go more and more. He was the leading ice time in terms of defenders for this team in the playoffs. And that is such a glaring deficiency and you have to go back to a guy who is a one zone defender to be able to have him out there. And great, he possesses the puck, but he also gives it away, and we saw that yesterday. So it's not piling on because he piled on himself.
Yeah,
he said he was responsible, and I agree. And I've said that he's been a problem, but the problem is that the Leafs really have no other viable options in the top four other than playing Gardiner and Zaitsev and Ron Hainsey, who was probably a good 5 or 6, but he had to be a top 2 on this defense. And that I think that came to fruition in Game 7, where after Riley gets hurt, they have to put Gardiner out there every second shift. They're down to 5 defenders, and Babcock's fallback was putting Gardiner out there more.
Gardiner looked afraid. He looked tentative. He looked overly cautious. He looked like he didn't want to be out there. And for me, it's disappointing as a follower of the team, but also somebody who wants to see these young athletes succeed, to watch a guy who's 28, who was there for the collapse 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Number 51 should have been the pillar, should have been the rock. But it's just not in him. It's just not who he is. So the question is, why is he out there? Why is he on this team? Jake Gardiner could be the 4th, 5th defenseman, the final piece of a championship puzzle in the Western Conference or with another organization. He is clearly not the guy the Maple Leafs need. And this is a direct correlation with how things turned out for Phil Kessel. This is the Leafs Conversation. I'm Norman James, along with Mike Augello. Thank you so much for your support. This podcast is growing leaps and bounds, and it's really all because of you and our good friend, Mr. Augello in Buffalo, New York, one of the smartest, sharpest guys that you're going to come across when it comes to anything that has to do with the Maple Leafs. Period 2, the Leafs scored 2 goals. They got the Travis Dermott goal right away to tie the game at 3, which gave the team a lift, which gave the fan base that feeling that maybe this is meant to be. And then Kasperi Kapanen scores, undoes Brad Marchand, scores shorthanded, just turned Tuukka Rask inside out. The youngest player to score in a Game 7 in the history of the league, I believe, or maybe just for the Maple Leafs. But, I mean, it was a significant goal, and it meant a lot. And they took a lead into the third period, up 4-3. Let's talk about that second period, Mike, because that was a fantastic period for all of Jake Gardiner's ails, for all of the Leafs' problems defensively and their lack of composure. That was a fantastic period, but really kind of almost an aberration when you look at the entire body of work last night. So give us your thoughts on that.
Well, unlike the first period where I think, either he was victimized or he didn't make the save, Freddie Anderson really stepped up in the second. He made 2 big saves, one just before the Kapanen goal. And I think it was Kapanen was the youngest player to ever score a shorthanded goal in a Game 7. I think that's what it was, which is, for a fairly narrow statistic, but whatever. Sure. But yeah, I mean, Dermott made a great individual play on his goal after Pasternak blocked the shot. He recovered it and fired it off the inside of the post past Rask. And, I think the confidence that Babcock showed in Dermott, like especially when Riley was out late in the first, he put Dermott on the power play. I was thinking they were going to put Zaitsev on the power play because he played the power play before last year, but they put Dermott out there. And I think that, that little bit of show of confidence in him, gave him the ability to really step up in the second period. So, I mean, it was the best of the 3 periods for the Leafs. They had a modicum of control going into the third, but really they didn't have a lot of control. I mean, I think it was a bit of an aberration, or a bit of a, it was the appearance of control, but they really didn't. And we saw early in the third that they didn't.
It's the schizophrenia of this team, the night and day, the contrast, the ups and downs of this team's performance, not within a certain time frame over a bunch of weeks or a quadrant of the schedule. It's up and down throughout the entire game to score first and then give them back and then look good and then look bad and then own that second period, taking a 4-3 lead into the final period potentially of the season for the Boston Bruins or for yourselves. And obviously it turned out that it didn't work out in the favor of the latter. Mike, when they dropped the puck on the third period, I still felt like the Bruins were going to win the game. And that's not me being negative. I just didn't see enough throughout that first 40 minutes to reassure me that the Leafs were able to hold this thing down. Now, going into the third period, the Leafs just totally came undone. Did you just feel like there was a lack of composure? And is that on the who do you pin that on? Who do you look to for responsibility and taking the helm? Is that somebody on the team that needs to do that? Is that Austin Matthews, Ron Hainsey, Jake Gardiner? Is that Mike Babcock? Why wasn't this team as a group able to just take a breath, relax, be composed, and just play a damn hockey game and keep this thing close? Why did it all come undone?
Well, I mean, if you noticed the way that they were playing in the second period, I was impressed with the fact that I was really buying into the fact that the Bruins may have been fatigued at that point. Chara was looking slow. The Leafs were winning the puck battles. They were winning constantly stick checking, lifting up the stick, getting the puck. They were fast. They were aggressive. And in the third, there was a passiveness there. It seemed like, okay, let's do what we did in Game 6 and play that smart defensive style, that we did, and limit the Bruins' chances. And that didn't work at all at any time at TD Garden. It didn't. They gave up 22 goals in 4 games. They gave up 7 goals twice there. The only game that they won, Frederick Anderson, was stood on his head for the last 30 minutes and barely held on to the game. So last night, the fact that they sort of, I don't know if I can't say they sat back, but there was a passiveness there, and they didn't have that aggressiveness that they did in the second period. Maybe thinking that if they were aggressive, they were going to lose the lead. But honestly, the way this team has played all year, when they've tried to shut a team down defensively, they don't have what it takes in terms of players or in terms of a style to be able to do that, and that's what was their undoing last night.
Sports is a really weird thing. Is this a psychological barrier that players need to get over? Do you have to have that winning mentality? Are they not pumping each other up enough in the dressing room minutes before the next period starts? Is Mike Babcock not lifting them up with some sort of philosophical commentary or words of wisdom as they're taking the ice? What is it about the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs of a team, not over a long period of time, but even within the confines of a game? It's incredible to go from what they went through in the first period to taking control of the game in the second period, then just being a totally different team in the third. There has to be a level of consistency there that is the current, that is cranking out, a positive and consistent pulse constantly, that for this team to kind of have that as its guide, making its way from the first period to the third period to one win to the next series win on the way to the Stanley Cup. Mike, I tweeted this out yesterday. We know who the Leafs are generally, but what this loss did is point out who the Leafs are not. And for them to become a successful team and ultimately challenge for the Stanley Cup, they have to become that. So let's talk about what this team needs to become to rise to the next level of its contentionhood, if you will. What does this team have to start doing, and how quickly does it have to start doing it?
Well, I think this summer is going to be, probably their most important in this rebuild era, because it's not now, getting those franchise cornerstones. They have them. Their names are Marner and Matthews. I don't put Nylander in that category, not to cast any aspersions on Nylander, but I think he's more of a high-end complementary player than he is a cornerstone. It's Marner, the way he stepped up in this playoff with leading the team with 9 points. It's Matthews, and in spite of the fact, I know that there's a lot of criticism out there about Matthews in this series. He only scored a goal and an assist in 7 games, but as I'm saying in my article for Hockey Buzz today, he had 2 Hall of Famers and probably a future All-Star on the ice with him at every single moment in McAvoy, Chara, and Bergeron. So, they kept him in check. What it was necessary is for everybody else on the team to step up. And, honestly, I think Van Riemsdyk had 3 goals in the series, but was he even noticeable yesterday? Was Tyler Bozak? Nazem Kadri, I hardly noticed at all last night. I mean, you had the guys who stepped up were the young guys. You saw Kapanen, you saw Connor Brown, Zach Hyman. I think was the consistent, other than Marner, was the best forward in this series.
He's a beautiful player, Mike. He's a beautiful player. What a player.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think this team needs more Zach Hymans. They need more guys who will antagonize, who will press the teams in their own zone, who will go to the net. There wasn't enough of that. There wasn't enough snarl. There wasn't enough fight back against the Bruins. And, I think, first of all, in the offseason, we're going to have to find out whether Lou Lamoriello is the GM or not. And if he is, then Lou Lamoriello is going to have to go to work in terms of the one area that is overriding the reason why this team lost this series, which is their blue line. Their blue line is not up to capability.
Okay, so if it's Kyle Dubas or someone else of a younger mindset, does the progress of this team perhaps stall would say somebody like Dubas, who is used often by the analytical crowd or the analytics crowd as the poster child for, being representing everything they believe is good and right all the time in hockey.
Right.
And it's interesting because I think Kyle Dubas is more than that. But does Kyle Dubas come in and say, hey, we don't need to go out and get a John Carlson, or we don't need to go out and get a Oliver Ekman-Larsson. We don't need to go out and get somebody who's more of a commander back there. Jake Gardiner is perfectly fine because the stats that we choose to select that paint drop a basic metric on his game are positive. So it's not his fault at all, because you already see the Jake Gardiner apologists on social media, people who would rather, have Lou fired and Babcock fired and bring in Sheldon Keefe and all the young people. Remember, it's the petulant crowd, right? So if, say, Lou Lamoriello is not the general manager and Mark Hunter maybe has a reduced role, and you turn the keys over to a younger generation, does this team take any positive steps forward, or is it really just all about what the spreadsheet says?
No, I think they'll take a step forward. I think it'll be different if it's Dubas. I've been led to believe it's going to be Lamoriello for at least another year. I mean, I have no hard and fast facts on that, but with the contracts of Marner, Nylander, and Matthews coming up, and Lamoriello's long ability to be able to get deals done for less than what most people think, i.e. the Riley deal, the Kadri deal, I think that Lamoriello is going to stay around. And I think they like I said, they face an important crossroads this summer, and I don't think they want to risk that with somebody who's going to be a first-time GM in his early 30s. I think that it's too important. I think eventually he will be the guy, but I think that it's going to be Lamoriello. And in that case, I think that he has struck out twice. He didn't get Travis Hamonic at the draft last year when they were trying to get him from the Islanders. He didn't get Ryan McDonough at the trade deadline because he didn't want to give up the package of prospects and draft picks that the Lightning did.
But they're going to have to start moving people now, Mike. You know that,
right?
Now,
yeah, and that's where I'm saying he's got two strikes on him, and Lou Lamoriello is a big baseball fan. He's a Yankees fan. He knows that if he strikes out, if he swings and gets strike three, he's out.
But here's the thing, though, Mike. Can I just respond to that? Here's the thing, though. Is Lou Lamoriello a people guy? Because the analytics people are not people. They're numbers people. So they don't believe in people or humans. They believe in what that particular player or human creates metrically. This is about more than metrics. This is about people. You know what I'm saying? Like, Brad Marchand is more than a statistical creator. He's a person. Zdeno Chara is 6'11" or 7 feet on skates because he's a big moth. You know what I'm saying? He's not just a guy who puts up numbers and is pushing towards a Hall of Fame career. These are people. And my concern is that if you bring in a group that is just more concerned about what the data says, that you're just going to continue to ice a team of individuals who have good stats on their own, but collectively might not sync. And the other thing too is, remember, Jake Gardiner is a statistical dream for some people, but as somebody who has to use his brain and use his sense and his sports understanding and his intellect on the ice, he leaves a lot to be desired. So we've seen where some of these statistical darlings can take us, and they're not taking us in the right direction. And the last thing, Mike, and I know you want to talk about on Lou Lamoriello, let's not forget that what he had to work with, just resource-wise, trying to structure some of these deals is going to differ from what he might have at his disposal in the offseason. If Nylander comes into play as a trade piece, if Jake Gardiner comes into play as a trade piece, knowing where they are now on the which phase they're trying to enter with this rebuild and this tooling towards his championship, clearly he's going to have more opportunity and a few more resources to deal with. But and when it comes to the analogy of striking out, well, I don't know if Brendan Shanahan's given him that ultimatum, but it remains to be seen.
Well, I don't think Brendan Shanahan's giving Lou Lamoriello ultimatums, but I think that basically they're pretty wise hockey men. They look
Yes.
at this situation and they know. And Mike Babcock is to me isn't he's not an analytics guy. I think he plays lip service towards it. He uses it, but every once in a while. But I think in general he is a sort of an old school type of coach. I think just on using the defense as an example, I think Roman Polak will be re-signed. I think Travis Dermott is probably going to end up being a top 4 next year. They're going to hope for improvement in Nikita Zaitsev after a injury plagued and illness plagued season. He wasn't even close to his rookie year, and they'll expect more out of him. But the big hole there is Ron Hainsey is, like I said, is better suited to being a bottom pairing guy, and they're using him 24 minutes a night in the playoffs, and that's probably not what they really plan to do. And Jake Gardiner is 1 year away from unrestricted free agency. And unless you're planning on signing him for $6 million a year because he's coming off a 52-point season, you're facing the same quandary that you did last year with JVR. You trade him or you sign him. And if in that instance, I'm saying you trade him and you get as much as you can for him.
Why have him and Travis Dermott on the same team? And right. Zaitsev and Riley and Hainsey. Who are you missing right now? You are missing the stalwart defenseman. You are missing a number one. You are missing Mike, and it has nothing to do with a guy who's just overly rugged or a player who has been through the wars. You need a commander, Mike.
But that would help.
You need a commander who's not in his late 30s, right? And if Travis Dermott's kind of the same player as Jake Gardiner, probably with a better hockey IQ. One, he's from Toronto. He's not, and I don't want to get into the territorial stuff. I mean, that
has nothing to do with it. What is more than anything, Norm? What it is Travis Dermott is it will be entering the second year of his entry level deal, making less than $900,000, and Jake Gardiner is making $4 million and would have to be re-signed for more than $5 million. So it's dollars and cents.
Sure, dollars and cents, but also too, if dollars and cents had nothing to do with it, I don't think Jake Gardiner would be the preferable option, Mike. With Mike Babcock, and we'll wrap this up relatively soon because we're going to be doing this podcast throughout the offseason. Like the intrigue has just begun. When Mike Babcock's looking inward for answers, what answers does he discover? And if the answers are the same things that he's been pulling from his hockey brain since he became a head coach in the NHL, is that a problem not only for him but the organization?
Well, I would hope that he has the self-awareness to make some different decisions based on what the end result was this year. For one thing, and I didn't come up with this and I didn't see this, but somebody who I respect, a friend of mine who's also a member of the media watching the game last night said he thought Freddie Anderson in the middle of the second period was completely gassed. And if you take into consideration that Freddie Anderson played 66 games during the regular season and played every non-back-to-back game up until like the last week, that load is too much. And then based on how many pucks he had to stop during this series and how much he was swamped and how much he was banged into, you have to consider maybe playing a backup goaltender more than 15 games like he played, or 15 or 16 games like he played Curtis McElhinney. So that's one thing. The other thing is I think Mike Babcock has got to stop pretending or stop imposing his will and being a pseudo general manager on this franchise because, again, for the second year in a row, they traded a second-round pick for a player who's going to walk away for absolutely nothing, meaning Thomas Plekanec, and last year Brian Boyle. And both instances, they helped this team in the playoffs, but this team is not in a position right now to win a Stanley Cup. They're in a position where they're sort of, let's see where the kids are going to take us. And trading assets and for a veteran player who's a stopgap, letting that guy go and then losing out on a draft pick is just idiocy. And they think they did it because Babcock said, I need a fourth line center. Well, you know what? Either go out and get a fourth line center who's going to be there for more than 1 year or go with what you got.
I hope this thing doesn't combust before Mike and Brendan and Lou and Kyle and Mark and Austin and Mitch are hoisting Stanley Cups, because it would be so Leafy and so Toronto for this thing to fall apart before it really gets a chance to top out, if you will. And again, right now we are eating our own. We are very frustrated. We're feeling very bratty and petulant and angst-ridden, and we should. It's less than, what is it, 10, 15 hours since the Leafs lost, right? I mean,
Sure.
12 hours. And this is all part of the process. But remember, it's 105 point season. A lot of firsts, a lot of great things. Mitch Marner really emerging. Austin Matthews over a point of game. Freddie Anderson making saves that put him alongside the elite goaltending community in the NHL. There are a lot of good things about this, and I hope from these losses there is growth, and there is a hunger and a fire of reignited for going forward, and making amends for the wrongs, right? And I really do hope that even with Mike Babcock's success and his stature, his pedigree, that has enough humility to find within him opportunities for personal growth and professional growth. Because if not, there is only one market in hockey that can take the biggest names in the game and reduce them to nothing, and that is Toronto. This market will love you and adore you. You know this. This is the biggest hockey market there is, and this is the most important. This is the center of the game. That you can come in here and be a hot shot. You can leave with your tail between your legs. Ask Brian Burke. Ask Ron Wilson. Ask Paul Maurice. Ask Randy Carlyle. Ask anybody.
Ask
Mike
Phil
Babcock,
Kessel.
Phil Kessel, everyone. Mike Babcock has the chance to avoid that and have his name mentioned in the same lore and vein as the Johnny Bowers and the Punch Imlachs and the Conn Smythes. He has that chance, and I hope that he's able to show enough self-awareness and realize that the entire organization needs to find a way to grow and get better, and there are always ways to improve, even if you have the resume that no one else has based on success. The last thing for you, Mike, and this is on Babcock and Austin Matthews, Nick Kyprios, who many people love, some people don't. I think he's fine. Writing for Sportsnet, and this could be clickbait, that Mike Babcock has lost Austin Matthews or lost him along the process of the playoffs. Now, I'm not sure if this is a suggestive headline that really doesn't have much substance, or if there's something to it. Because if Mike Babcock and Austin Matthews aren't on the same page at this point in their relationship so soon, there could be trouble. But I'm not so sure. I think it's a little fishy and suspicious. I'm not so sure I'd read much into it. Just your thoughts on it, and we'll shut it down.
Yeah, I think that's totally off base. I've been following this team. I've been covering them. I've been to all but 2 regular season games and all the playoffs, and there's been no inkling of any kind of dissension between Matthews and Babcock. I think, Babcock called it the way it was yesterday. He said that, essentially after the game, this is a learning process, and, top players are going to face top players in the playoffs, and their job, like Pavel Datsyuk in Detroit, is to rise above, is to next year, if they face Bergeron and Chara, Matthews has got to step it up and do it. And that's part of the maturation process. He's 20 years old. So, I mean, that's why, I'm not going to be one of the course out there that is going to say, okay, Austin Matthews is not coming up big when it counts. Well, last year he led the team with 4 goals in 6 games.
Yeah.
Last year, Mitch Marner was nowhere to be found in the first round, and we found out afterwards because he had mono. This year he's the cat's meow. And I think that, there are going to be a lot of changes this summer with this team. Probably Bozak is gone. Van Riemsdyk is gone. There'll be probably a couple other players that are gone. There'll be players added, and that'll give this team a different look and hopefully a better chance to win next year.
You'll upgrade at those positions, Mike. You know that. On Austin Matthews, I love the guy. I love his temperament. I love how fiery he is, but I also like how even-keeled he is. But let's make no mistake, he's not Sidney Crosby. He's not Connor McDavid. He's not LeBron James. Austin Matthews is an unbelievable player. He's a franchise player, but he is in no position to start dictating who the head coach would be or who his line mate should be, at least not at this point. You know, go win a couple of Art Ross trophies and a Hart, and then we'll talk. And we've seen how it works in the NHL when a player is essentially the headmaster of an organization. Take a look at Alex Ovechkin. How many Stanley Cups has he won? And I don't think Austin Matthews is ever going to get to that. And Mike Babcock, I do believe, look, you know, we praise him for the things he says and how eloquent he can be and how he gets a real sense of the moment. Publicly, I'm sure he's like that privately when he has to be. But this is a time for the organization to look inward and congratulate itself for where it's come, but also remind itself that it has a much greater distance to go to get to where it needs to. But it has that ability, and I think we as fans and people who cover the team also need to look a little bit inward and ask ourselves: all this pent-up aggression, all of this rage that is being exhausted today. Is this bluster, or do we really feel this way? I think it's the former, Mike. And as we go forward here, we're going to feel good about what's been accomplished and know that we're all going to be along for the ride as much more accomplishment takes place, Mike. What are you writing right now? What are you doing? What are you focused on? What's the next step for you, knowing the Leafs are done, but there's more playoffs to follow, and clearly the intrigue is just beginning to unfold as to how this team amends itself and improves itself in the off season?
Well, I'm going to be finishing up my piece for Hockey Buzz and posting it in a little bit. But tomorrow, there will probably be locker cleanout day at Air Canada Center. I'll be up there for that, and there will be a lot of questions. I mean, we'll probably get a chance to talk to Lou Lamoriello to see if there'll be any kind of hint about what his future may hold. If that's status quo, then it's going to be what changes are going to be made. Now, obviously, they're not going to reveal we're going to target this guy, that guy, but I think as we did last year after locker cleanout, what the future holds, and also we'll get a chance to talk to James Van Riemsdyk and Tyler Bozak and those free agents and see what their future holds.
Look, Mike, win or lose, there's more to cover with this team, right? That's basically how it is. And it's just been an absolute blast to get to this point with you. And the Leafs Convo, Mike, is alive and kicking. And thank you so much for your contributions. Let's do it again real soon, okay?
Thanks, Norman.
Wow, locker cleanout at Air Canada Center is going to be an absolute blast, isn't it? Good luck to you, Mike Augello. What are you going to ask Jake Gardiner that he hasn't already asked of himself? What I want to know is what the head coach thinks of this entire experience, what he's derived from this latest playoff failure, how he's looking inward to improve his coaching behaviors as the leader of a team that needs to improve its overall playing behavior. Stay tuned. Now, I know this loss is still fresh. It still stings. You're still reeling from this disappointment. You can eat each other alive on social media. You can denigrate your team. You can act a fool. But rage and resentment are pointless. There's already enough regret over the Leafs' poor performance from last night without us having to regret our poor reactions to it. Keep that in mind as you tweet throughout the day. Look, last night's game revealed once and for all who the Leafs really are, right? And who they need to become. Yes, it's frustrating, but it's also freeing because now 100% we know. The Leafs head back to the development table right away. 100-point season next season is ahead. Beyond that, for sure. Hopefully, the success going forward comes with more competence, confidence, composure, and a real championship chance. What do you think? I think the Leafs are headed for better days, and I believe my kids are going to see the Leafs win a championship in their childhood. That's just me. When I die, turn my tweets into a book, please, because that's how I'm living my life these days. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We're now on Google Play, iTunes, Anchor, Pocket Cast, Overcast, and of course, the YouTube page is blowing up.
big time. And if you think the Leafs Convo is about to wind down because the season is over, think again. We're really just ramping up because the offseason is full of so much intrigue and possibility and some really nice things in the form of awesome players when it comes to trades and July 1st. For Mike Augello, I'm Norman James. Thanks again for listening. This is the Leafs Convo. We'll talk to you real soon.